You know what? It is really good to have Gabe back with us. Is that not cool? Just visiting. The Classic Crime were supposed to lead, Matt and Christy were supposed to lead this morning, but then they had a huge show last night in front of, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people down in Seattle, and Gabe was willing to step in at the last minute. It's just really cool to have him back here, isn't it? Yes. This morning, we are going to wrap up this series that we've been in about judgment. And to this point, we've been looking at one primary question. When is it appropriate and when is it not appropriate to judge another person? So far, this series has been about sitting in the seat of the judge, okay? But this morning, we're going to switch this up a little bit, and we're going to shift, okay, from this chair. How cool is this visual? We're going to shift from this chair, okay, the one doing the judging, okay, to this chair, the one being judged. And here's the question for today, okay? What do you do when you're the person that's being unfairly judged? Because at some point, we will all sit in this chair. It could be that they think you're too rich. It could be that they think you're too poor. It could be that you're not good enough for their son, or you're not good enough for their daughter. You'll be judged by the color of your skin. You'll be judged because you're too passive. You'll be judged because you're too aggressive. You'll be judged because you're not smart enough. You're not talented enough. You're not confident enough. You'll be judged because you're overconfident. It just goes on and on and on. And at some point, we will all spend time in this seat. At some point, we will all be unfairly evaluated. So what do you do when you find yourself in this seat? How do you respond? Because this is a very dangerous place to sit. And I'll bet that just about all of you have known somebody who sat in this seat and they were unfairly evaluated for so long that it really started to affect their behavior. Maybe this is you. I mean, maybe you have been horribly misjudged, and it's gone on for so long that it's really begun to affect you, because it's extremely difficult to sit in this seat over time and not allow it to affect your behavior. This is a dangerous spot, because if you sit here for very long, it's very hard to not give the people that judge you power over you. Okay, for example, maybe you feel judged by someone, and you're so desperate to prove them wrong that you overcompensate. Like maybe you go out with people who drink a ton all the time, and they judge you for never drinking. They call you a prude or whatever. So you decide you're going to prove them wrong, okay? But you way overdo it, and you react to their judgment, and in your reaction, you give them power over you. Or maybe you feel like someone around you is labeling you a failure. And so you're so determined to be successful. You're so focused on proving them wrong that you don't let anyone or anything get in your way. But maybe along the way, you lose sight of what it is that's really important to you. You get so consumed with proving that you're successful that you lose yourself along the way. And you're giving them power over you. Or maybe their criticism and their judgment is causing you to question yourself. You start doubting and you start asking questions like, am I smart enough? Am I talented enough? Okay, am I a good parent? Am I good at my job? Am I a good husband? Am I a good wife? Am I a good person? And you're becoming insecure. You're allowing them to have power over you. Or maybe you've had it with their judgment. You've just I've had it. And you're getting bitter. You're getting vengeful. And you decide, you know what, I'm going to get them back. And maybe you start to become really critical of them, or you start to gossip about them, or you do something that's outright mean, like something cruel. That's not who you are. That's not who you want to be. But you react, and along the way, in your reaction, you're giving them power over you. It's very difficult to sit in this seat for very long without eventually giving the people that are judging you power over you. Okay, so what do you do? When someone's judging you and they're forming negative opinions about you, okay, very unfair negative opinions, and you can't change their minds. Okay, you can't just talk to them. You can't just explain the situation. You can't just give them time to get to know you better. You can't just tell them your story for whatever reason. It's just not working to reason with them. What do you do? How do you handle it? What do you do when you're sitting in this seat and you start to realize, oh man, I'm giving them power over me. I'm starting to think differently. I'm beginning to second guess myself. I'm beginning to change. I'm starting to withdraw. I'm beginning to overcompensate. Starting to fight back. I'm getting bitter and vengeful. I'm doing things that I would never do. So you ask, how do I get out of this cycle? Because there's nothing that I can do about the way that they view me or the way that they're treating me. I've done everything that I know and it's not working. So what do I do now? And that's a big dilemma. Like if you're a student and you're judged constantly at school, or this is an issue if you go to work and someone in your workplace judges you and you feel it every day, or if you have someone in your family, maybe your mom, maybe your dad, maybe a brother or sister that's so critical of you, just judging you all the time, then this is an issue for you. Or if you're single and you're getting more advanced in years and you're starting to feel judged by somebody around you for still being single, then this is something that you deal with all the time. Maybe you have in-laws that judge you by how you parent or how you provide for their daughter or the kind of work that they think you ought to be doing for a living. At some point, we will all sit in this seat. And the reality is, this is a dangerous place to be. So how do you endure unfair judgment without giving those that are judging you power over you? I mean, is it even possible to stay true to yourself? Here's the thing. As followers of Jesus, the one that we follow actually understands this dilemma. You think about how misunderstood and how misjudged he was. They considered him a drunk. They said he was a liar. They said he disrespected God, called him a blasphemer. They said he misled and deceived people. They said he was an enemy of Israel, that he supported Rome. And then they turned right around and said, no, actually, he's trying to start a revolution against Rome. And the judgment of him just went on and on and on. They said, Jesus, you hang out with the wrong crowd. You eat and drink with prostitutes and tax collectors. And you're not very smart. You don't know the scriptures. You lie about where you were really born, and you don't even know who your real father is. Jesus was as wrongly judged as anyone has ever been, and yet somehow he never allowed those judging him to gain power over him. At the end of his life, they arrest him, they falsely accuse him, and they crucify him. And yet in the midst of all of that, not once did Jesus give power to those who were judging him. Now you think about that and go, how did he do that? Is that something we can do? Is this something that a high school student can do? Is this something that a young single adult can do? Is this something that a young mother can do when she feels judged? Is this something that you can do at work? Is there a way to sit here without becoming insecure, or without overcompensating, or without getting bitter and doing the kinds of things that you don't want to do? Is there a way? Today we're going to think about how Jesus handled this. And before we get to that, I just think it's kind of fun to think about how Jesus could have handled it. I mean, you think about Jesus, like, Jesus knew people's thoughts. He could read people's minds. He knew everybody's secrets. And he could have just blown people up. I mean, he could have just blasted people. Like somebody's criticizing him, and he's like, Nathan, before you judge me any further, I know that everybody thinks of you as like a religious man, a righteous Pharisee, and you're married to Rachel here, so how come you're always thinking about Megan? Oh, did I say that out loud? And by the way, Megan, why don't you stand up here for a second? I mean, you talk about me breaking the commandments. Let's talk about your last 2 weekends. I mean, you think about the kind of stuff that Jesus could have done, the kind of stuff that he could have exposed. Think about the reality for a second that Jesus had all power. All power. Like he could have just brought down lightning on people. He could have made an earthquake where like the cracks just swallowed up his critics. Or he could have like pronounced a curse where all of his critics got like really bad acne. Thinking about what Jesus could have done, you go nuts with it because it's kind of limitless. But he didn't do any of that. Jesus never leveraged his power for his own benefit. He never used it to promote his own selfish agenda. He never took revenge on his enemies or his critics. And even though he sat in this seat constantly, he never allowed those judging him to have power over him. He stayed true to who he was. He overcame. Now, how did he do that? I want us to consider something very famous that Jesus said, because I think it gives us insight into how he was thinking, like where he was coming from. And we're going to look at the apex of people misjudging and mistreating Jesus. And I want us to think about how he responded to them. I want us to look at the perspective that he had in the midst of all of this chaos. Okay, now here's the scene. It says Luke chapter 23, verses 35 to 39. And this is at the cross. And it says, the people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, he saved others. Let him save himself if he is God's Messiah, the chosen one. The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, if you're the king of the Jews, save yourself. There was written a notice above him which read, this is the king of the Jews. One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us. So Jesus he's on the cross, and the religious leaders are mocking him. The Roman guards and the soldiers, they're all mocking him. And even the guy next to him, is that nuts or what? The guy next to him on his own cross is mocking Jesus. And this is just an extension of all the abuse that he's now been taking for several hours. At the beginning of the night, Jesus is being held by guards. And you think about what went on in that place as he was being held by them. Okay, this is Luke 22, 63 to 65. It says, the men who were guarding Jesus began mocking and beating him. They blindfolded him and demanded, prophesy, who hit you? And they said many other insulting things to him. Okay, so here are these guards. Their job is just to keep an eye on Jesus. What do? They blindfold him, and they circle around him, and they start wailing on him. And they say, prophesy, who hit you? Come on, Messiah, prophesy, who hit you? And you think about this. They're saying that to the very one that breathed life into them unknowingly. The one that could tell them how many hairs were on their head. The one that had stored up their tears in a bottle. The one that kept their very hearts beating. The one that knew them inside and out. And I think about how much twisted pleasure there was for those judging Jesus. Years ago when I watched The Passion of the Christ, one of the things that deeply affected me in that film was the pleasure that people got in mistreating Jesus. Like in the film, the guys that were flogging him were just laughing. Just laughing. And it was just unbelievably cold, unbelievably cruel. And you go, well, is that even realistic? Well, that's exactly the feel of what we get in the scriptures. Like, I don't think Mel Gibson just sort of made that up. Here's the scene right before Jesus is being led out to be crucified. He's already been flogged. And as I read this, I just want you to get an image in your mind of what's happening. For some of you, maybe it would be helpful to close your eyes. Okay, this is Mark chapter 15, verses 16 to 20. It says, the soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, that is the praetorium, and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. And they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Again and again they struck him on the head with a staff and spit on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to be crucified. Back to the scene now of the crucifixion. Throughout all this stuff, Jesus is, for the most part, completely silent. But in this next scene, we're going to see him finally speak. This is Luke now, chapter 23, verses 32 to 34. At the cross, it says, 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him there along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing." Think about that. Those are probably the most gracious words ever uttered. How did Jesus handle being wrongly judged? How did Jesus refuse to give power to those that were judging him? His strength came in the form of grace. His strength came in the form of grace, in the form of forgiveness. And I'm going to tell you that there are a lot of ways to handle being wrongly judged. You can work feverishly to prove them wrong. You can overcompensate. You can start believing what they say about you. You can doubt yourself. You can become jaded. You can become hardened. You can lash out. But all of that stuff gives them power over you. If there's any victory to be won when you find yourself in this seat, forgiveness is the only way. If there's any victory to be won, if there's any way out of this whole mess without giving power to these people, grace is the only way. Now, I know maybe some of you are saying, okay, but wait a minute. You don't know how bad it is. I mean, this is not like one time. This is not like little stuff. This is every time. It's every time I go to school. It's every time I go to work. It's every time I walk through the doors of my parents' house. It's the same every time. It's every time I see my in-laws. Every time they come over to my house. You don't understand. You know, my dad has been unfairly judging me my entire life. He's been beating me down my entire life. I can never do enough to please him. You don't know how bad it is. I just want to say you're right. I don't know your story. I don't know the depth of what's gone on. I don't know the person who's judged you, but here's what I know. When it comes to people who wrongly judge you, you're either going to give them power over you or you're going to forgive them. Jesus says, pray for the forgiveness of those misjudging and mistreating him. He calls out to God. And then he tacks on kind of something really strange when you stop and really think about it. He says, Father, forgive them. And then he adds on, for they do not know what they're doing. Really? I don't know about you, but there's something in me when he says that just wants to go, well, wait a minute, Jesus. What do you mean they don't know what they're doing? They're killing you. And they're making fun of you as you're being tortured and executed. And they know that you're innocent of all this stuff. I mean, what do you mean that they don't know what they're doing? Here's what I think what Jesus is saying. He's saying, Father, let's forgive them because they don't know me. Let's forgive them because they don't know you. Let's forgive them because they're blind, because they're deceived. Let's forgive them because if they knew the whole story, they wouldn't be doing this. God, let's forgive them because they're ignorant, because they're insecure, because they feel threatened. Father, let's not hold this against them because they're just doing what they know to do. They're acting on what they've seen. Father, let's forgive them because despite how evil all that they're doing is, we both love them intensely. Let's forgive them because in the big picture, they really don't understand the significance of what they're doing. Part of the process of extending forgiveness for Jesus was seeing his accusers differently. Recognizing that they didn't really know what they were doing, that these people didn't know the whole story, that they had their own issues to overcome. So rather than feeling anger, he actually felt pity. He felt love. He felt grace. And I just want you to think for a second. For those that judge you wrongly, and maybe as we're talking about this, there's somebody that just comes up for you. I mean, it is right there. Would it be possible for you to start looking at them through a different lens? Because if they really knew the whole story, if they really knew you, if they really knew God, if they didn't have major issues themselves, maybe things would be different. And if you could start to see them through that lens, maybe you could let go of some of your insecurities. Maybe you could let go of some of the anger. Maybe you could let go of trying to prove them wrong. maybe you could pray for them. In Luke 6, Jesus said something that I think most of us agree with in theory. He said something that we think would be great for other people to do. Comes to our life, real life, when it comes to actually putting this into practice, this is really hard. But here's what Jesus said in Luke chapter 6, verses 32 to 36. He said, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Now, maybe we hear Jesus' words here, and we ask, well, what good is that going to do? Like, Jesus, the people that are judging me are brutal, and it doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter what I do. They're never going to change. I can't change them. I can't fix this. But maybe Jesus is saying to you, okay, you don't understand. I'm not trying to change them. I'm trying to preserve you. I'm not telling you to love them just so they'll feel loved. I'm telling you to love them and forgive them because that's the best thing that you can do for you. Friends, in your world, when you sit here, you may have 4 or 5 or 6 options for how you can respond. There's only one good option. And God wants to bring you to a place where when you're judged, you can say, you know what? I am not going to just store up bitterness and rehearse this over and over and let it kind of throw me into a tailwind. I'm just not going to. I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not. I'm not going to try to become something that they want me to be. I'm not going to react and become something that I don't want to be. I'm going to find a way to stay who I am. I'm going to find a way to forgive because that's the only way to sit in the seat of the judge and not become something that I don't want to be. And Jesus says, and get this, Jesus says, when you do that, you become a child of the Most High. Friends, when you sit here, you're being told who you are. Okay, you're too rich. You're too poor. You're too small. You're too big. Okay, you're too light-skinned. You're too dark-skinned. You're not smart enough. You're not good enough. You're not talented enough. You're not right. You're just not enough. But when you sit in this seat and somehow you love and you forgive, Jesus says, make no mistakes. You are sons and daughters of the Most High, of the Heavenly Father. Because that is the very heart of God. When you behave like that, Jesus is saying, oh man, you are a beautiful reflection of your Heavenly Father because that's how He is. Friends, what do you do when you find yourself in this seat? What do you do when you find yourself unfairly judged? It may be the most significant thing that you do as a follower of Jesus. Because what you do when you sit here may reflect more to the world that God is real and that your relationship with Him is significant and that He's really living in you than anything else you can do. Your response when you're sitting in this seat may be your greatest opportunity in your family. It may be your greatest opportunity at work or at school, wherever you find yourself. Because there is a common way to react to that stuff. And it's so easy and it's so natural and it's what everybody sees. But if you do something different, people are like, whoa, wait a minute. Whatever it might be, your response when you're judged may be the thing that God uses to reveal Himself to people around you more than anything else you do. Let's go back to the scene of the crucifixion. There's a Roman soldier there, and he's a part of the whole process of crucifying Jesus. He's a centurion. He's been a part of this whole deal. And he watches Jesus die. He sees the abuse, and he watches the reaction of Jesus. Now check out his response. Okay, this is Mark 15:39. It says, and when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus saw how he died, he said, surely this man was the Son of God. So this Roman soldier has just watched Jesus die. Now keep in mind, this soldier had probably seen hundreds, maybe even thousands of people die. This is a daily occurrence for him. He'd seen him die in battle. He'd seen him die quickly. He'd seen him die slow. He'd seen him die on crosses, probably by the hundreds, maybe thousands. Here's a guy who made his living executing people. He made his living crucifying people. Like day after day after day, what am I going to do today? I'm going to get up and I'm going to kill somebody. And he had seen people respond to death and respond to circumstances like that in thousands of different ways. And he watches Jesus and he says, surely this man was the Son of God. You think about that. Like when he saw how Jesus died, not how Jesus defended himself, not how Jesus justified his behavior, not when he saw how Jesus made this awesome defense of himself in court, not when he saw Jesus out-argue everybody, not when he saw Jesus finally get vengeance or finally get justice. When he saw how Jesus died, he came to the conclusion, we were all wrong. This was all wrong. We just put to death a man who somehow, in some way that I don't even understand, was sent to us from God. Friends, if there is a victory to be won when you're in this seat, it is only through forgiveness. And maybe you say, okay, this is so hard. Like, I don't know if I can really do this. I'm not telling you what's easy. I'm telling you, your only hope for not handing power over to the people that are judging you. I'm telling you how to be a reflection of Christ. I'm telling you how to do something different from the norm. Something beautiful. I'm telling you the only way to live with a heart that's free. All right, let's pray together. Jesus, I thank you so much that you were so different. And I thank you that through your death, through your resurrection, you've set us free from ourselves, that the Holy Spirit can come into our hearts and enable us to do things that are supernatural. And one of the chief things among those is to be able to forgive and love people that aren't treating us well. And I pray that you would help us to follow your example. Pray that you would remind us of how much you forgive us, of how many times we've done the same thing and we come back to you over and over and over and say, Jesus, forgive me, and you do. And I pray that you would help us to take that grace that you fill us up with and begin to pour it out to the people around us in a way that's supernatural, in a way that gets the world's attention and they say, oh man, that's different. And I pray for the relationships that many of us have with people who have brutally misjudged us. I pray that in the process of us letting this go and just loving them and maybe even inviting them back toward us in some way, God, I pray for reconciliation. I pray for healing. I pray for some of those people to come to you. I pray that you would use this in a mighty way in our workplaces, in our homes, in schools, everywhere we go.